Hello to everyone. I'd like to present myself. Like Jakob said, my name is Kemi. I work at Dopter. I'm a user interface designer, which means I do all the forward public-facing stuff there. I also do some stuff for Nordic APIs, so if you see any typos on the website or on the banners, you know who to blame. At Kemi is where I tweet about user interface, HTML, CSS, and a bit of typography, which is my personal passion. So we're going to start off. I'm going to talk to you about how good user interface design makes your API better. And now there's a question that you all might be asking yourselves, which is, why are we talking about design? We're talking about something as abstract as APIs. How is design relevant to APIs? How and why do I need to make my API pretty? Well, I would like to get something out of the way straight away, which is design is not about making things pretty. Let's start out with your API when you put it out into the world. You need some point of contact with the public. A developer portal. I'm going to use the term developer portal, even though it might not be a portal per se that you use as that point of contact. It might be a blog, it might be some kind of offline documentation. But you need some kind of way of getting information about your API to the world. And what the point of contact needs to do is it needs to attract new users, get them started to hello world, your API. It needs to help them get into production and produce actual code. It needs to help them maintain that code. And finally, it needs to support them all through all of this, maintain a dialogue between yourself and them. So I'm going to show you two examples of developer portals. And we have this one, and we have that one. So which one do you think is more effective? I can tell you that I had a hand in designing one of it, so I'm a bit partial. But more than which one is better, the question is why. Why is it more effective? Is it just because one is prettier, because it has nicer colors, or what is it that makes a developer portal successful? So let's take a look at what the elements are in order to make a successful user interface design specifically applied to this. Your developer portal needs to be understandable. Somebody that visits it needs to, at a glance, be able to understand the information that is in it. It needs to be usable, which means they need to be able to interact with this information in an easy way. It needs to be attractive. It needs to be a pleasant experience to use this documentation. And lastly, it needs to reflect your brand. This is more about you than about the developer, but in any case, it's important that it is consistent with the rest of your brand. And all of this contributes to a good developer experience. And again, here I'm using developer experience a bit broadly because you need to keep in mind that it's not only developers per se that are going to be visiting your developer portal. It might be all kinds of users that you need to take into account, but I'll get into that a bit later. So the next step is, how do I get good design? And here I'm going to go into some practical points aimed at non-designers. I promise you won't have to learn Photoshop to understand any of this, but just some principles that you need to keep in mind throughout the whole process of having a developer portal. Good user interface design. I'm going to go through three main elements, which are the building blocks of user interface design. The first one is information architecture, user interface, and visual design. I'm going to go a bit deeper into what they are and how you apply them to a developer portal. The first one is information architecture, which is all about the content and the structure of your developer portal. You need to figure out what information do your different groups of users need. For example, beginners, they might need an overview, getting started tutorials. More expert users are probably looking for detailed documentation on specific methods or parameters or very technical specifics. And then don't forget, there's a non-technical audience that is looking for information to probably mostly to make business decisions. They want to know licensing, they want to know partners, they want to know information that's not technical, and that's a group that's so often overlooked. And once you have your structure, you need to find, once you have a content, you need to have a structure where you can have that information. You need to group it into categories or sections that are easily understandable, that are easy to find. It's a good idea to go progressively from the more broad subjects to the more specifics, so that users can drill down to find information they need and aren't just immediately taken into something that they might not know what you're talking about. Make sure that you have clear paths to the information, and don't forget a good search, a search that will help users find by keyword or by topic. I have an example here from MailChimp's API documentation. You can see how they've divided in getting started, how to, downloads and API wrappers, and MailChimp API. And again, it goes from the beginner level to the more advanced level, from how a developer would progress, get started, read some guides, how to, and then get into the more technical side of things. The next part is a user interface, which is how users interact with the information you present them with. And you need to answer two of users' questions. What can I do, and how can I do it? What is information I can find here? What are the tasks I can accomplish it, and how do I do them? And the two key ways you're going to make this easier for your user are consistency and clarity. Consistency means make things look and behave the same way. The most obvious thing is, if you have a search form, have it always placed on the same place in the page. Also, make sure you follow conventions that are used throughout the industry. You don't have to do everything the way others do it, but don't break the rules if there is something that works and everybody understands already. And clarity, which is, if something is a button, make it look like a button. It should be clear to the user. And remember also that text is part of the interface. And this starts from before you have a developer portal. When you're naming things, when you're naming methods and parameters, make sure you use terminology that your users will understand. And when you're writing documentation, you need to make sure you think about the tone you speak to your users to. Do you want to make it dry and to the point, or do you want to make it light and fun? Well, there's no right answer. It depends a bit on your audience, but make sure you choose a tone and you stick with it throughout your documentation. And how do you make sure also that your user interface work? How do you need to plan how it will be laid out. And you do this by sketching, wireframe, or prototyping. And well, the easiest way to do this is with just pen and paper, sit down, make some boxes and some dummy text, and you can think about what needs to be on each key page and how it is best to have things go together. You can also use more complicated software like Photoshop, or there are dedicated tools for wireframing like Balsamic mockups, or I'm not sure, but that might give you a bit more polished look. Or you can jump directly and do HTML prototypes, especially with frameworks like Bootstrap. You can relatively easily have something that is semi-functional and that can perhaps even be reused in production later on. But this will give you a pretty good idea of if things are working. But how do you make sure you're on the right track, really? Well, user tests. And this sounds like it's complicated and expensive, and you need to hire a company to do all these studies. But it doesn't have to be. You can take 5 devs and invite them for coffee over at your offices and show them your prototypes, observe how they interact with them, ask them some questions, and that will give you valuable insight into what works, what doesn't work, what is not clear. And then the last part is the visual design, which is what we mostly think of when you think of user interface design. And it's not called look and feel for no reason. It's all about the subjective experience of how the user perceives and feels the interface. Is it light and airy? Is it fun? Is it technological? Is it classical? And this all has to do with your brand. It needs to align with how you want your brand to be perceived. And the 2 main tools you have for this visual design are layout, which is how are things placed on your page. And there's 2 principles here that you need to keep in mind. One is hierarchy. Figure out what's the most important thing on the page or the most important things on the page and make them stand out. Using size, color, type. The most obvious example is, the title of the page. Well, it should be bigger. It might need to be another color. The subtitle, well, you want it to be smaller. The text should be even smaller. That's an obvious example, but when you have a complicated page with lots of functionality, it's easy to either try to make everything stand out and then nothing stands out, or to have everything just be flat on the page. And the other part is grouping. Group things that are of a similar functionality or similar content together. You can also do this through shapes, colors. The easiest way is white space. If you just create a white space around a unit of it or a group of things, well, our brain tends to automatically think of it as a unit and separate it from the rest of the page. And the other part is aesthetics, which is type, colors, grids, which is the part that has to do most with your branding. In all of this, the priority should be in legibility and clarity. When in doubt, always remember less is more. For type, you want to make sure that your font is legible. Different platforms, different sizes, different devices. Color, when in doubt, black, white, and your corporate color works perfectly well. And grids, which is a very useful tool to take the guesswork out of placing things on your page. If you have a grid system that will tell you, you have X amount of columns, then you can have this unit that spans these columns, which will help you with the principles I told you before of hierarchy and grouping to create units that you can then place around the page. I have an example here. This is Campaign Monitor's API documentation. You can see some of the principles in action. You can see how the title is big. It has a color behind it that makes it stand out. They've used a light blue color to highlight the navigation and the icons they have down here. And you can see how this grid creates order. It makes it all seem like, even though it's distinct wrappers, it's all a unit. It has white space around it, and the grid makes it look orderly and together. So the question is, how do you get this design? Well, the traditional way we think about it is, you hire a designer, they make a nice Photoshop layout, give it to you, and your developers implement it. But it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Many of you maybe are already using applications that have some of the functionality for API documentation or a developer portal that already have some of the principles that you might be able to customize through CSS to have exactly what you want or customize in some other way. And if you're starting from scratch, I already mentioned frameworks like Bootstrap or Foundation that can get you a head start with many of the principles. They already have grids built in, they already have typography. You can have it easier than starting from scratch. So, a checklist that you need to have. You need to make sure, first of all, that you have the right information and the right structure, that all kinds of users will find what they're looking for in your API documentation and be able to engage with it. And here, always remember that the developer portal is more than just reference documentation. You need more information in there for other kinds of users. And so look beyond that when you're planning. The second part is it easy to interact with? This is probably the most difficult part to know yourself, which is why user tests are important here. To see that when you're developing, you just become blind, staring at something all the time. But then make sure that users can successfully navigate and interact with the documentation to find what they're looking for. And that way they can be recurring users. If somebody can't use your portal, they'll just give up and look for help elsewhere. And last, well, make sure it reflects your brand. And this is important for your own sake. And make sure it makes people want to come back. If it's a nice site to use, to look at, then people will want to be coming back. So, if it's not about pretty, what is design about? What is the importance of design in the API world? Well, it is about engaging users with your API. It is about engaging with your brand in general, not only with your API. It's about making them excited about your API. It's about making them productive with your API. And an API that has happy users is an API that will thrive. It's an API with users that will not only use it, but talk about it, recommend it. And that's how user interface design makes your API better. I would love if anybody has not only questions, but comments, if anybody has experience that they like to share. I'd love to hear about them.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for a great, refreshing talk. One thing you did not mention, and I hate those sites, it's when you have a program that will create the documentation automatically, and then someone publishes it, and that's the API documentation. I don't think any of those look good. Do you have any good or bad experience regarding that, or any comment on that?
Well, I think that can be, if you have that kind of solution, unfortunately, you can't always choose what solution you have. Maybe for time constraints or budget constraints, you're stuck with some of that. But I think if possible, then it's important to look beyond that. Maybe that's what you have as your method listing reference, but then you can try to have a blog where you have tutorials and more detailed information around it. There might be the possibility, like I mentioned, to customize that through CSS or alter the templates to make it a bit nicer. But yeah, unfortunately, that is limiting in what you can do with your API documentation.
Cheers, thanks for that. Would you say that there are different design styles you should have for different target audiences of APIs? You know, whether there's kind of a large corporate design or whether there's a get it out there user sort of mashup style design of UI interface?
Well, I think in terms of the visual, yes, for sure. You're going to have different styles if it's a fun company. If you have a name, for example, like one of the examples I use, if you have a name like MailChimp, it's obvious that your brand is all about fun, and you're probably targeting an audience that's younger and less enterprisey, corporate-y. But in terms of the underlying principles, I think a good interface is clear for any type of user, or should be clear to any type of user. A beginner should be able, or a non-technical user should be able to come into your portal and understand it the same as a super technical user, enterprise level than, a kid in his basement. So if you follow, then it's like a bit more the coat of paint that might appeal to some people more than others. But if the underlying structure is good, then I think it can appeal to pretty much everyone, or it should.
All right. Thank you, Kemi.
Thank you.